In our last session, we talked about what internal controls were, what they look like, and what they set out to achieve. And in this lesson, we're going to put our auditor hats back on and figure out why we audit internal controls and how. Now, auditing standards require the auditor to gain an understanding of internal controls, regardless of whether they plan to rely on them or not. Tying back to our lesson on the audit risk model, we know that understanding is necessary to assess audit risk and to identify the types of potential errors and frauds. We gather the information about the control environment, general computer controls, and specific control activities by discussing them with the client and examining internal documents such as the policy manuals. We will document our understanding using one or more of three potential methods. First, we could use a narrative description of the process and the controls in place. Second, we could use a flowchart representation of the sequential process flow in the transaction cycle. Or third, we could use an internal control questionnaire, which asks a series of questions about the controls that are in place. Flowcharts and questionnaires are probably the preferred methods. A great deal of this information will be carried forward year to year and will only need to be updated for repeat engagements. We will trace one or a few transactions through an accounting system to confirm our understanding. This is called a walkthrough, the purpose of which is to ensure that the systems actually function as they've been documented in our file. The assessment of control risk has a direct impact on the planned detection risk and the extent of the audit work required. Control risk is separately assessed for each of the major transaction cycles. Audit objectives, which are essentially the same as management assertions if you remember, are specified for each transaction cycle. Then, key controls within transaction cycles are identified that best address these audit objectives. We need not identify every control as key. In fact, there may be one or two or three controls that address the same objectives, and we can pick the one which we believe is either the most effective or most efficient to test. As we have previously noted, controls can be manual, automated, or computer-assisted. The nature of controls will have an impact on the tests we perform. Generally speaking, computer controls can be more effective to test than manual controls because there's less risk of human error. This, of course, assumes that there is strong general computer controls in place. Once you have proven that the computer is operating as intended, you need not retest it over and over again. Only if the computer system is changed do you need to perform more testing, which is rare. Whereas with manual controls, you need to consider the operating effectiveness throughout the entire period, which is subject to human frailty. What happens when an employee performing the control leaves, gets sick, or goes on vacation? That sort of thing happens all the time, which can lessen the effectiveness of a manual control for a period of time. So at this point, we have documented our controls, assess control risk at less than maximum, indicating that we intend to place some reliance on the internal controls, and we have identified the key controls in place that address our audit objectives. We are now ready to test controls, which will be the topic of our next lesson. Until then, don't stop till you get to the top. When you get to the top, don't stop.